Helicopters with machine guns fired on rebel positions, according to witnesses. In Tripoli, forces loyal to Gaddafi are keeping a tight grip on the capital. Our correspondent Anita McNaught is in the capital and has been allowed limited access by the Libyan government to send us this report.
Well, we travelled for more than an hour through the streets of Tripoli today after Friday prayers when we were aware there were plans to stage some kind of a protest. But Tripoli itself, a city almost completely locked down, electronic communications cut off for the previous 24 hours, shops shut, practically no people on the street, and a very, very heavy security presence, police and army at major intersections near the two areas we wanted to see, Sushuma and Tajura. Now, fellow journalists actually were there when there was an attempt at a protest in both those places, but both times the security presence was so heavy that if anyone appeared who looked like they were a protester, they were immediately outnumbered and surrounded. Further to the east of the city, in the area of Zawiya, where there has been a rebel holdout against the Libyan government said this afternoon that they had retaken that area, then qualified it by saying there were still pockets of fighting, but isolated, and we understand that fighting has continued into the evening.
Now, in AlJazeera in eastern Libya, a standoff has developed between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces. AlJazeera's Jackie Rowland has more.
The situation now in the east of the country is really a stalemate, with anti-Gaddafi forces either unable or unwilling to advance further towards the west and to try to take the fight closer to Gaddafi strongholds like Sirte and Tripoli. The pro-Gaddafi forces also seem unable or unwilling to do much more now apart from scrap against the rebel forces over a few towns in the deserts to the west of Benghazi. Now, when you look at the rebel forces, they're a rather undisciplined, unorderly bunch. Some of them will freely admit to having no military experience as recently as a week ago. And the weaponry they're using is a combination of old Soviet anti-aircraft guns and also some newer weaponry. But they are very undisciplined. They just seem to be letting off ammunition at the moment, wasting ammunition with no particular purpose. Now, this uprising that began a couple of weeks ago with such power and energy does appear to be losing momentum. And if anything right now, it looks as though the pro-Gaddafi forces have the upper hand.
Well, some 180,000 foreign workers have streamed across Libya's borders. The UN says more than 90,000 have fled to Tunisia and some 80,000 have crossed into Egypt. Another 2,500 have crossed at the Niger border. But while agencies are warning of a growing crisis for these refugees, thousands more are still stuck inside Libya. Bernard Smith reports.
Row after row of tents in this UN transit camp on the Tunisian side of the border with Libya. The site is already full. But the process of moving these people home has picked up. Throughout Friday, 40 flights will head to Cairo alone. Britain, France and the United States are providing aircraft to help the evacuation. The UN says that the number of refugees crossing into Tunisia has actually dropped significantly because the border there is now manned by heavily armed pro-Gaddafi forces. So almost all of Libya's neighbours could end up dealing with fleeing workers. Some have now fled through Algeria, further down Libya's western frontier. And up to 100,000 people may try to cross into Niger in the coming months. That's according to the UN. At Egypt's frontier with Libya, hundreds of African refugees are stranded in a border no man's land. Some have been there for days. Here, the Egyptian authorities have tightened security, fearing that mercenaries hired by Gaddafi may try to flee to Egypt. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
The US State Department has confirmed that humanitarian supplies have been delivered to Tunisia to help refugees who fled from Libya. This was what spokesman PJ Crowley had to say.
There is an international airlift in progress, which has significantly helped in easing the crisis caused by the influx of migrants into Tunisia. These C-130 aircraft today are carrying humanitarian supplies. We anticipate that tomorrow they will return and participate in the flow of migrants from Tunisia back to Egypt.
Well, Kimberly Hulkett is at the State Department now for us. So, Kimberly, presumably this is in keeping with the focus that the US is putting very much on the humanitarian side of things rather than any kind of military developments at this stage.
Well, that is certainly the focus that the Obama administration is really trying to put out there, but it has been a week of mixed messages. We are hearing from the State Department, as you just played there from P.J. Crowley. In fact, yes, the push right now is humanitarian. But we heard from the president just 24 hours ago that all options are still on the table, both military and non-military. That means that the president is trying to get things into position so that he can be at the ready if he feels that this crisis deteriorates to a level, a humanitarian crisis, as he put it, deteriorates so far that the U.S. needs to act. Now, I pushed the spokesperson for the State Department, P.J. Crowley, on that. What would be the red line that would cause the U.S. to act? He did not want to answer that question. He continues to say that the U.S. is focusing on the humanitarian effort and that they are really trying to see this resolved peacefully through dialogue.
And one of the things they seem to be pushing is this line that they don't want to be seen to be interfering, pointing to the fact that in Egypt, as they put it, the protesters had ownership of the developments.
That's true. It's a big concern. The United States does not want to be perceived as, Hillary Clinton put it, the Secretary of State, invading a country for oil. There is a very profound awareness of the anti-American sentiment that exists on the Arab street and particularly in this region. And so the United States is especially concerned that the focus would be, any sort of well-meaning intentions could be perceived as something other than helping out. At the same time, though, the U.S. is not taking any chances. We heard Secretary Gates talking about the no-fly zone and the risks that would be involved were it to be imposed and urging caution to lawmakers. But at the same time, we're hearing others on Capitol Hill who are very much in favor of that option.
OK, Kimberly, thank you very much indeed for that live update there. Well, Tariq Youssef is a senior research fellow at the Dubai School of Government. How does the American administration get around this kind of mixed message, as Kimberly put it there, between saying that they're preparing for all eventualities, but at the same time kind of looking like they're not actually very keen to be going in?
I think the American administration is in a bit of a dilemma. Their military is overstretched. They have to, and they've insisted since President Obama came to the White House, that any intervention outside needs to be multilateral, meaning it needs to go through the UN. There needs to be a lot of consultation with NATO, with other allies. And with Egypt and Tunisia still in flux and the prospects of a humanitarian crisis in Libya still looming, I think their messaging is intentionally camouflaged to maybe keep the pressure on Gaddafi, but at the same time keep him guessing as to what the next steps are. I think they have enough assets right now in the theater to give them all the possible instruments at their disposition. Which one they would move at a particular point in time is going to be subject to what happens inside of Libya and how they perceive it. I
want to ask you about Saif al-Islam and the interview that he's given to Anita McNaught. You've sort of watched him over time. How did you think he seemed in that interview? I
think I was struck by two impressions of him in the interview. At times, completely in denial, basically denying every fact that the world is observing and Libyans also are observing inside the country.